Brexit has returned to the political stage after being upstaged by the coronavirus pandemic. You've probably heard about the high-charged rhetoric surrounding the trade negotiations in the UK's internal market. We're going to unpack what all that means for the Brexit process and where it might be heading. So it's over to Satyajit.
Yes, Ross, I mean, a lot has happened over the past 2 months. This is a very unique situation as there are new developments every day and a new narrative is charted out every week. So trade talks with the European Union are intense. I think the stakes are high and there are only weeks left to salvage a deal as Britain prepares to leave the EU single market. I think with the second wave of coronavirus hitting the UK and Brexit talks being inconclusive, there is a lot on Prime Minister Boris Johnson's plate, and I think Boris wants to go his way and has exhibited political brinkmanship. And with the recent events of Boris Johnson threatening to walk out with a no deal and Brussels taking legal action against the UK, things are heating up. And while Mr. Johnson is playing the hardball, I think the EU wants a smooth transition with minimum economic costs.
Mm-hmm. I think what you're saying there is we've got to distinguish between before 2020 and where things are now. So with the Brexit process, the difference between normal trade negotiations and these negotiations is the status quo ends on the 1st of January. There is this deadline.
Absolutely.
The clock is ticking, and that's what is applying this pressure to the process. So you've got other negotiations, I think, perhaps between the EU and Canada, took years to reach a conclusion. These are highly charged times where actually the status quo is ending on issues like immigration, security, the biggest one being trade and aviation. So the dynamic is different because previously, when Theresa May was in power, it was whether Brexit was going to happen. Well, now it is going to happen, and that is certainly why the importance of the trade negotiations cannot be overstated.
We were totally clear that we wanted nothing more complicated than a Canada-style relationship based on friendship and free trade. To judge by the latest EU summit in Brussels, that won't work for our EU partners. They want the continued ability to control our legislative freedom, our fisheries, in a way that is completely unacceptable to an independent country. We have only 10 weeks until the end of the transition period on January the 1st. I have to make a judgment about the likely outcome and to get us all ready. And given that they have refused to negotiate seriously for much of the last few months, and given that this summit appears explicitly to rule out a Canada-style deal, I've concluded that we should get ready for January the 1st with arrangements that are more like Australia's, based on simple principles of global free trade. But for whatever reason, it's clear from the summit that after 45 years of membership, they are not willing, unless there's some fundamental change of approach, to offer this country the same terms as Canada. And so with high hearts and with complete confidence, we will prepare to embrace the alternative, and we will prosper mightily as an independent, free trading nation, controlling our own borders, our fisheries, and setting our own laws.
I mean, if you look at the trade negotiations, it's been very interesting because I think the UK has been very adamant to get a Canada-style deal, whereas over the past week, we've suddenly moved on to a scenario where we could see a no deal, or in other words, an Australian-style deal. So to, in fact, talk about the trade negotiations, I'd like to speak about as to what a Canada-style deal is for viewers who are not very sure about what it is. So the UK wants a Canada-style deal, which it calls as a reasonable deal, and a Canada-style deal would be based on the EU's deal with Canada, which includes zero tariffs, zero quotas, but with no common regulations on the environment, labor, and state aid. That's precisely what the UK is looking for in order to provide subsidies to their businesses and have more freedom towards regulations which concern their domestic audiences. I think, see, the UK alleges that the EU will not agree to this, as it intends to control the legislative freedom and the that the fisheries be the fisheries of the UK or domestic businesses. But EU has consecutively disagreed with the UK on grounds that its deal with Canada was its deal with Canada was that it was able to give Canada greater freedom and control, as both countries were geographically distant, and that EU also does a very small percentage of trade with Canada. So that I think that amounts to about 2% of EU's total trade. So the EU says it's not fair to expect such a trade deal with the UK, because if Canada slashed environmental and labor standards to boost productivity, it would not hurt the EU that bad. Whereas the UK, if you see the UK's trade with the EU is huge and is closer to the continent geographically, which makes issues such as regulation on environment, labor regulations, and state aid, which in simple term refers to subsidies, a huge deal for the EU.
I think you've got to the crux there of what these trade negotiations are really all about, because there's been many, some in person, some online because of the pandemic, but none of them have gone particularly well. And I think what you're alluding to here is you have these both sides just seem to like slide past each other. You've got the UK when it comes to the state aid or the argument of a level playing field, is you have both sides taking rather legitimate positions. So the UK is saying we are this independent sovereign country. You get, David Frost and the UK negotiating team, they often complain about how the EU doesn't quite recognize them as being a third party like Canada. It's almost as if the UK negotiating team continues to think that the EU sees them through as being still in some form a member of the EU. Obviously, this technically since January this year isn't the case legally, but you have these both sides taking these different positions. So you mentioned fishing over the UK's legitimate independent self-governing state status. But the EU also saying, well, you want to sell in our market, therefore there's some sort of balance here. But I think an interesting thing again is you have this level playing field, and in terms of regulations, as you were talking about, this idea that the whole point of Brexit, David Frost would argue, was to break away from the very integration that the EU has become known to have. So on these issues, both sides very strong in the positions that they're taking. It's almost as if they're not compatible. But with any negotiation, both sides have to make some sort of concession, and essentially, in the end, it's all going to boil down to trust. And absolutely, I think what we're seeing now is there's a limit in the scope of which the negotiators and the trade negotiations themselves are able to make progress, because quite often in trade negotiations, it does come down to the political willingness and the landing ground, if you like, for a deal. And that's where we are.
As Europe bit by bit begins to lock down again, EU leaders went ahead with their meeting in Brussels for the second time in 2 weeks. But it's not the coronavirus crisis which is top of the agenda, rather back to Brexit. There will be no breakthrough deal at this summit, instead a battle over fishing, with France and Ireland digging in their heels.
Preserving our fishermen's access to British waters and making it possible to find a good compromise for our fishermen, and I'm talking about all the European countries concerned, it is an important point in this discussion for us.
I think fisheries is a very, very unique case, because I think one of the critical reasons for this current standoff is the area of fisheries. I think both sides are being adamant on their stance. The UK is currently part of the EU's common fisheries policy. And suppose I think the EU is looking to access fishing waters post Brexit, which the UK is not inclined to share, and the UK conveniently also wants to access the EU's fishing market while denying them access to British waters. So
Right.
I really thought there would be some kind of a consensus on it and they would reach a conclusion, but I really do not see anything as of now. But what is scary is, I think in the no deal situation, but the UK will have monopoly over its waters, and would that would mean it would fish more. And currently the UK's fishermen fish 85% of the fish from their own water. So with a no deal, it's more fish. But the problem is that UK fishermen sell 65% of their fish to the EU. So I mean, if you're not going to give fish water access to the EU, I really don't think the EU would give market access to the UK.
Right. And I think you're seeing even within the EU 27 in the summit this weekend, there's a lot of disagreement between the leaders. On the one hand, you've got Macron, who's taken a really hardball maximalist position on fishing, whereas you've got Merkel is taking slightly different position on fishing. So you've got this sort of dynamic within the EU 27 itself, because remember, they are a trade bloc. They've all got to agree on the position it's going to take, and that is complicated an awful lot by no deal. But I think the EU, I think many in the EU circles are sort of getting the impression now that the UK rather, is treating these negotiations almost with contempt, partly due to the internal market bill. And in so doing, in the event of a no deal, which has become more likely, then there's not going to be this friendly relations which the UK thinks there might be. Now, this is the EU's perspective here, in the fact that France could make things a lot more difficult for the UK at Dover and Calais, at those strategic trade posts. So you've got this dynamic as well playing out between the EU, within the EU, as well as between the UK and the EU. And I think it's worth just talking a little bit more about this internal market bill, which has almost been the nuclear option in these talks. Now, the Brexit process is so intertwined that what happens in what's called the Joint Committee, which is all about the withdrawal agreement, which was agreed and ratified this year, the 1st of January. And what this does is it's meant to be this mechanism which oversees the Northern Ireland Protocol, which was part of the withdrawal agreement. So really what happened was, in order to get the withdrawal agreement done, the protocol was fudged. It was almost a contradiction. So in order to get it over the line, Boris made the concession that Northern Ireland would technically be in the UK's custom territory, but would follow some of the EU's customs code. So you have this very ambiguous idea that the Northern Ireland is in some sort of fudge between being part of the UK, but also applying to the EU's rules. So that was agreed, but it was for the Joint Committee to decide how that was going to work in practice, okay? So this legal fudge has opened up the opportunity for the UK and the EU to have different interpretations of that law. So the proposal of the internal market bill itself is, in theory, in the legal sense, it's all about how the UK government ensures that the four nations of the UK are not limited by any regulations set by the four, so it's by the four nations. The idea being, if it comes to no deal, the UK can still make trade deals. It's a level playing field within the UK. The problem being with this bill is it breaks international law. Now, that was said by one of the government's own ministers themselves. And the reason being is it overrides the Northern Ireland Protocol, of which the Joint Committee was trying to work out. Now, why, in terms of technically and legally, yes, I've explained why that is, but the reality here is it's politics and it's the brinkmanship, because this part of the internal market bill is related to the withdrawal agreement, but it's also related to the trade negotiations we were just talking about, because we were just talking about fishing being a really big stumbling block, although economically it's not that significant, but politically and socially it is. So these trade negotiations weren't really going anywhere. So what happened? The internal market bill was put forward, and it was seen as a really quite an explosive development. from the UK side. But what's critical to note is the talks didn't break down. The talks are still going. And I'm just going to touch on something you said earlier about this idea of Brexit and the second wave sort of coming together. Both sides still want a deal if they can get a deal. So yes, it was a very provocative move, but ultimately it was really meant to be a threat. It was meant to up the pressure of these negotiations to try and bring the political will together to get a deal over the line. So yes, in the sense, the UK is ripping up an international treaty, which itself was vague and ambiguous, but it's ultimately likely to fail in the House of Lords. And so the bill itself, its destiny is unclear. But let's not forget the purpose of the bill itself was because of what was going on in the trade negotiations.
As you know, we had invited our British friends to remove the problematic parts of their draft internal market bill by the end of September. This draft bill is, by its very nature, a breach of the obligation of good faith laid down in the withdrawal agreement. Moreover, if adopted as is, it will be in full contradiction to the Protocol of Ireland, Northern Ireland. The deadline lapsed yesterday. The problematic provisions have not been removed. Therefore, this morning, the Commission has decided to send a letter of formal notice to the UK government. This is the first step in an infringement procedure. The letter invites the UK government to send its observations within a month. And besides this, the Commission will continue to work hard towards a full and timely implementation of the withdrawal agreement. We stand by our commitments. Thank you.
So if you look at the EU's legal action against the UK, the European Commission has raised the stakes and sent the UK a letter of formal notice for breaching its obligations under the withdrawal agreement. The UK government had failed to withdraw the contentious parts of the bill, as you said, despite requests by the European Union. But I think it is very much political, as the bill was always going to cause trouble. But it is, however, not a breach of the protocol that the Commission is complaining about in the Article 258 proceedings. This is because those powers given to the UK ministers under the Internal Market Bill are yet to be exercised. Instead, the Commission is complaining about a more general breach of Article 5 of the withdrawal agreement on the duty of good faith. So, I mean, and if you look at the legal process as well, I mean, I think a proper legal battle between the two. Between the EU and the UK would extend beyond a year, which is unlikely, as I think it could come to an end by December when we have a deal and we have more clarity on the issue at hand.
You're right. I think that breaks it down to what this is all about. It's not about the technicalities anymore, because the talks have got to that stage where there isn't really much more they can do without the politics changing. And you had the UK's version of the politics by raising the internal market bill, but you've also got the EU threatening this legal action. And I think it's all part of this bigger picture of cynical expectations in the Brexit process. Both sides apply the threats, they apply the pressure, and eventually, for those who followed the Brexit process closely in the past, what does it lead to? It leads to concessions, which we're always going to have to be made. And that's set on a set of assurances and assertions between London and Brussels, and eventually a deal is made. But what we have, the point we're at just now, is you have the dial of pressure being turned up. Both sides are sort of not quite willing yet to trust either, the other, and that's a pretty big problem in negotiation. And what we've got now is both sides ramping up the pressure, but I fully expect in the days to come, as talks are intensified, you will see assertions, you will see negotiations actually taking place, because crucially, neither side has walked away from the table yet. That's the big thing to remember. So when they intensify talks, if there is progress here, you'll see that the problems will just go away. because at the end of the day, it comes down to political will. However, as I said in one of the articles I published for the St Andrews Economist, the political will is harder to get this time. Last time, it was all about, when we got the withdrawal agreement passed, it was between then the Irish Taoiseach and Boris Johnson, when they went on the whirl. They had that political discussion that was able to move the negotiations. That's hard because Boris can't necessarily jet off around Europe on a charm offensive this time. So you would be mistaken for thinking that the talks are about to collapse and that no deal is inevitable. No deal is certainly a bigger possibility now than it was even just 5 days ago. However, it's characteristic of this process that the rhetoric gets ramped up, but eventually we will probably see. Now, it's all guesswork and it's just what's happened before, but it's likely that we're going to see some concessions coming forth. And where I think they're going to be, just quickly, I'll let you come in again.
Yeah, no worries.
The three stumbling blocks in the talks of the issue of state aid, and which is essentially this level playing field, fishing, and of course, the governance mechanism for any deal that is which is reached. And in the last few weeks, take internal market bill and all the political tensions out of the equation, we've seen a willingness from David Frost that the UK could accept a mechanism, which means that the level playing field would be worked out in a mechanism rather than agreed before, which basically means that the UK's sovereignty could still be protected by not having to sign up to specific rules and regulations, but the EU would have assurances because they knew that there would be this mechanism. And if that is probably where it's going to go with the concessions, and when you get that far, the issue of fishing just kind of floats away. And that's certainly what, but the problem is, what would governance look like? Because the UK doesn't want the ECG to be involved. Would you have a bilateral arbitration panel? But again, as we talked about earlier, that runs into the same issues which led to the internal market bill. Getting this sort of legal fudge to get a deal over the line only puts the problems further down the road, right?
Absolutely. See, I really hope they have concessions and they reach a deal. But, you know, the whole rhetoric again around this is basically around economic nationalism and sovereignty, etc. So I really hope that the UK really looks beyond those and looks at real economic benefits and economic stability, because the Prime Minister explicitly before the nation last week seemed to favor a no-deal scenario. But the thing is, if no deal is reached, it reflects a total failure of the negotiations with the EU, and I think it is extremely costly economically. As per the Financial Times, for instance, beef and lamb farmers would face tariffs of 40% to 100%, which would put many of them out of business. And I think car manufacturers would also face duties of 10%. And the government's own reasonable worst case scenario suggests that up to 70% of lorries traveling to the EU might not be ready for new custom checks. So in a case of no deal, the UK would not have to would not have to sign to EU legislation. For instance, they would not need to sign the EU's health and sanitary standards, work rights legislation, and other environmental legislations. I mean, that is okay. I mean, that to an extent gives the UK certain liberty over over regulations. But if you look at real-time economic benefits, I think the costs outweigh the benefits. And I think a no-deal scenario will certainly have major costs. And I think there's also a fear that a crash out would increase national debt and would also give way to new calls for Scottish and Irish independence, which would negatively impact the unity of the kingdom. And I think many leaders of the Conservative Party and ministers within the government, including the Chancellor, are said to be against a no-deal scenario. But again, there's a lot of confusion around this. But the main theory in Brussels is that this deadlock and this hardball tactics by Boris Johnson was designed to raise the stakes in the negotiations, gain diplomatic attention, and accelerate engagement to the highest political level. I personally certainly hope that that's the real reason, and we UK. I hope that the UK does not have to face a no deal scenario in the future.
Yeah, and I think you'll find that most of the negotiators and those in EU and UK circles would strongly advise that a no deal is not preferable of either side. And I think essentially you have this 1-2 punch for both sides, that the political and the economic consequences of a no deal would be incredibly poorly timed with the coronavirus crisis for EU member states
Absolutely.
and the UK alike. So there is a willingness here to get a deal, if a deal can be done. But as the EU Commission President has said, not at any cost. So by no means is this process a foregone conclusion either way. But it's clear that there are difficulties. These talks have a very steep mountain to climb to get to a deal. But I think we're heading for one. But the risk of this no deal is increasing all the time.
Absolutely, Ross. Absolutely.
We are absolutely determined to reach a fair deal with the UK. We will do everything we can, but not at any price, as mentioned by Charles Michel right now. My team, our team, and I will continue intensive discussions over the coming weeks. Our positions are being crystal clear from the day one of this negotiation. If you want access to our market of 450 million people, there must be a level playing field. There must be free and fair competition.
So I think that concludes our discussion here about Brexit. We'll just have to see what happens.
Interesting times. Interesting times.
Take
Thank
care.
you, Ross.